So let's cover three examples of data manipulation statements. Okay, we have what's called the insert statement. Now, in the insert statement is used to add a record or records, okay, into a table. Um, well, just to show you the syntax, in fact, MySQL has a pretty well, I don't want to say lengthy, but it's this is the syntax for typing out an insert statement. Okay. Now there's also W3 Schools, which gives you a simpler, I guess, a more basic um, syntax for the insert statement. Now there are two ways to go about this. One is if you want to insert a record into a table, you have to, well, either you can put the fields where you want to insert data to, or you can omit that part. Of course, the difference between the two is that when you use the second syntax that's shown here, you have to supply a value to every single field of this table, whatever you have here. Also, the sequence of these values, they have to follow the sequence of the fields in the table. So in other words, if you're inserting, let's say, records into the student's table, if student ID came first, if the student ID is the first field, then your first value has to be a student ID. The second value, whatever it is, has to correspond to the second field that's in the table. Here, in the first syntax, that is shown here, the sequence of the values depend on the sequence of the fields listed here. Okay. Now you can also, by doing this, you can choose which columns will get values. Okay. All right. So just to take a look at an example of that. So let's say we're adding a student. Okay. Now looking at the columns of, or rather the fields. Okay. So let me run a describe statement. So we can just take a look at the structure. Okay. All right. So in the email and the phone, we are allowed to have null values, but not on the SID, first name, last name, and GPA. All right. So let's say I want to, a student has just signed up. Let's say we're trying to create an account or an entry for the student. So we can type here insert into students. Okay. So let's say we're inserting values to all fields. So insert into students, and we can type values. We can type it in the next line or in the same line, doesn't matter. And then now we just have to list the values that we want to insert into the students table. So let's start with the student ID. So the student ID, according to the structure, it's an int. Okay. And we cannot have duplicate values because it's a primary key. All right. So just a quick look at the contents of the students table. So these are the students. Okay. So let's say our student ID for this one is 7700001. Okay. And no quotes on that because it's an integer. And then the first name has to be in quotes. Let's say Johnny. Okay. And then the last name is Almonds. All right. Now we put an email. So let's say almonds@gmail.com and a phone number. Well, the phone number is a car. I'm looking at this. It's a 10. In fact, if we look at the data that's already there, so there are no hyphens. It's just a 10-digit number. So let's say it has to be in quotes. And as you can see, my values are separated by a comma. So let's say the phone number is 212-777-7777. Okay, finally the GPA. We don't have a default value. Well, the default value is null, but we're not allowed to have this field as a null. Okay. In fact, the way we should have set up that table is the default value should be, let's say, a 0. But nevertheless, we'll put here 0 as our default GPA. So if you cannot see that, I'm going to decrease the font size a little bit. Okay. All right, so let's run that and let's see what's going to happen. Okay, so far I got one record inserted. Okay, one row affected. All right, so let's find out if that went through. Select, well, actually, I don't need to even run it here. I already have one. So I'm just going to rerun this statement. Okay, so there's Johnny Almonds. In fact, let me try to zoom in so you can see better. Okay, so there's Johnny Almonds, 7001 Johnny Almonds 212 GPA of 0. Okay. All right, so that went through. Okay, that's perfect. So let's try another example. So let's insert another student. This time, let's see. Let's run the describe again. Okay, so email, no, okay. All right, so let's say in this case we have students' information, but we don't have, let's say, the email and the phone. All right. There are two ways to go about that. One is we can just insert the values into the other fields, but not the email and the phone, or we can follow this format. Okay, and again, the way I sequence these values are the same. Follows the same sequence that I have in these fields. So that's why I ran the describe, so I can see not only the settings of the fields, but also the sequence of the fields. Okay, so insert into students, values. Okay. Well, actually, let's use the other format, which specifically inserts into SID as first. Now, I don't have to list the fields here in the same order that they come up here in the table. I could have started with SGPA. I could put the first name here, and then for some reason I put the student ID. I can do it that way. All right. So, but I'm just, since I have the list of fields here, so I'm just going by that. All right. So SID as first, as last. We don't have any values for email and phone, so we're skipping that. And finally, as GPA values, let's say 7,000. If I attempt to insert this, I'm going to get an error because the student ID is a primary key, as you can see from the setting, and it can only have unique values. It cannot have duplicate values. All right, so let's say this is Jenny, Almonds. Okay, so we don't have phone, we don't have email, we have a GPA. Let's say GPA is 4.0, or we can just put 4. Okay. Anyway, 4 and 4.0 are numerically the same. Alright, so I'm going to run this. Okay, so that should put Jenny Almonds into our database, into our students table. So let's rerun that students table. Alright. Okay, indeed, we see Johnny and Jenny Almonds. Okay, so that illustrates how to use an insert statement. Okay, so how about updating records in a database? Now, MySQL offers what's called, or actually a lot of database systems offer a statement called the update statement. And as you can see, it's not exactly a long statement in terms of syntax. We put the update keyword followed by the table name, and then that's followed by the set clause, where we list the fields that will contain the new value or new values. Okay, and then we need to have a where clause to indicate or to find the records or the records that must be updated. So here's a simpler syntax of it. Okay, this is from W3 Schools. All right, so let's check out an example. Now let me run a select statement first, and let's say select asterisk from students. All right, so let's say I need to update Johnny's GPA. So I want to change that to 3.0. Okay, so to update Johnny's records, all right, so if I know Johnny's student ID, it would have been like this: update students. Okay, then we put set. Okay, again, the syntax says update table name set, and then you list the values, but you have to indicate the columns where these values exist. Or another way of looking at it is you have to list the columns that will contain the new values, and you have to separate them with a comma. Now we're only updating one column, which is the SGPA. So update students set SGPA to 3 or 3.0, numerically the same. And then we need a where condition where, and again, since we're given the student ID, we would put 700,001. I'm sorry, SID equals 700,001. Now, let's say we're given the first name and last name, although this is a bad idea realistically, but let's just say. All right, and we know that there's no other Johnny Almonds in the database or in this table. So it would have looked like this. So just like the where clause in a select statement, you would have put S first equals Johnny, in quotes, of course, because it's a string, and as last Almonds. Okay, so it would have looked like that. So it's just gonna be just very much like the where clause and the and, or, all of that in the select statement. So but anyway, we're given the SID. So SID equals 700,001. Okay, so let's run that. Now, all you're going to get is something like this. All right, so one affected row, one changed. So if you want to verify that, you can rerun the select statement, which one I'm going to do. And look at Johnny, say Johnny Almonds, a GPA of 3. Okay, so that's perfect. Now let's try another example. Maybe this time we want to, let's say we want to update Jenny's GPA, and we also want to change her last name. I'm sorry, we also want to put in her email address. Okay, so put update students. All right, and we're gonna need a set clause. What do we want the columns to have? So we want to put in her email, so it'll be s email equals, and then whatever her email address. So let's say Jenny Almonds' email address is jalmonds@hershey's.com. Okay, but because we also want to update the GPA to, let's say, let's do 3.75. All right, so as email calls her email address, comma, as GPA, and then her new GPA, so 3.75. But we still have to locate her, so ideally it will be through the primary key, which is the student ID. So where SID equals 700,002. All right, now if we used a condition here, that resulted to several records, not just one, then all of those records, I repeat, all of those records will be updated. Okay, so be careful in how you locate, okay? Be mindful of how you locate the record or the records that you want to update, because once you update them, there's no way to undo them. Right? All right, so I'm going to go ahead and run this. This is for Jenny Almonds. Okay, so once again, we just got a notice here, but to verify that, I'm going to rerun that select statement. Jenny Almonds, there's her email address, and there's her new updated GPA. All right, there's the email address, there's the GPA. All right, so that is what we call the update statement. All right, now let's move on. Okay, in fact, let me save this before I move on. I'm going to close that. So let's move on to another example. In fact, another example of a data manipulation statement. This is now, we're moving on to the delete statement. Okay, so the delete statement is what's used to, well, delete a record or records. Okay, so syntax is even shorter than the update. It's just putting delete from the name of the table. What can be confusing is if you recall, the update statement doesn't have from. It says update and then the table name. This one, you put delete from and then the name of the table, and then usually followed by the condition. W3 Schools, once again, presenting a simplified syntax. Okay, if you want to focus on the required clauses in a delete statement, there you have it. Okay. All right, so let's look at an example. So once again, I'm going to run select asterisk, from students. All right, just to see the students that we have. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete Jenny Almonds. Okay, so delete from students where, so now I have to find put a condition to find Jenny Almonds' record, and that would be let's say if I'm given her student ID, which is typically what's used for transactions like this. Okay, it would have looked like that. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and run this. All right, so it says one row affected. So again, you're not going to get any visualization of that other than just a notice in the output panel. So I'm going to run or rerun that select statement to verify that. And indeed, the Jenny Almonds gone. Okay. All right, so if I were to restore that, well, there's no way for me to do that. Also take note that when you use the delete statement, if Jenny Almonds is registered to courses, okay, in the reg table, let's say, those will not get deleted automatically. For you to do that, there's several ways to approach, a couple of ways to approach that. You can use what's called the concept of foreign keys, which is another topic in the succeeding meetings. You can also you can just run a series of delete statements to make sure that all related records will be deleted. You know, all related records to Jenny Almonds will be deleted. But that's something that you have to think about. That's something you should consider or be mindful about when you're deleting records. In this case, there are no courses associated to these students that we've just added, okay? And that's fine. So if I want to delete, let's say, Johnny Almonds, or let's say, how about let's get rid of any student that have student IDs starting with 7. So once again, that'll be delete from, okay, let's keep this statement back there. And delete from students where SID, like, remember, the like operator is what's used for pattern matching, and the pattern has to be enclosed in quotes, like so. And let's run this. Okay, now, so what's happening here is I am running a statement. I am deleting a record, or I could be possibly deleting several records. Okay, so this could be a record or records, but it just so happens I know what's in the students table. But nevertheless, the first one ran because it for sure resulted to the deletion of one record. This one, because just the nature of the kind of condition we have here, which is a pattern match, it may delete several records. And in MySQL Workbench, that's disabled by default. As you can see here, it says you are using safe update mode, and you tried to update a table without a where that uses a key column. Okay, so to disable safe mode, toggle the option in Preferences, SQL Editor, and then reconnect. So in other words, let me save this. Okay, and just close these. So I have to go to Preferences in the SQL Editor. I'm sorry, in Preferences rather. So Edit, Preferences. Okay, and the same thing for Mac. So I have to find SQL Editor and locate the safe mode. There you go. So it's the very last setting. If you scroll this list down under SQL Editor here on the left, scroll down, save updates, and so rejects updates and deletes with no restrictions. So that's an example that that condition that we have, the like 7. Yeah, that's like a very loose restriction, if you will. All right, so I'm going to uncheck that so I can run that statement. I'm going to click OK. And that, okay. So that should put me back here. But I'm going to close this and then reconnect. In fact, what I'm going to do is close the whole thing and rerun Workbench. Okay, so just waiting for Workbench to launch. Then I reconnect. Okay. So I'm just going to go ahead and open my statements. I'm going to open the first one. And I'm going to run that use statement. Close this extra tab, and I'm going to open the other one, the last one with the deletes, because I want to run this one with the like SID like 7%. Okay, so as it is, this is the contents of the students, and when I run this delete, it should let us. Okay, so it did because I turned off the restriction. So one row affected. So let's find out. Is Johnny Almond still there? Let's rerun that select statement. Nope, he's gone. All right. So so yeah, just be mindful also of that setting in Workbench. That will prevent you from executing update and delete statements that have broad conditions, and that's just a safeguard to prevent you from accidentally deleting a lot of records than intended, or more records than intended. Okay, so yeah, those are your data manipulation statements that are very important.